Siona God, hello all Osha afternoon, good afternoon, and Wado. Thank you for watching. So this is day 22 of Transformation of America, the true life story of a CIA mind control slave by Kathy O'Brien with Mark Phillips. And we're going to be finishing up chapter 4 and hopefully getting into chapter 5 today of Kathy's story. I never thought to associate Fiddler's Inn with Senator Byrd's fiddle playing when my friend and I arrived in Music City, USA, nor did I find it odd when a country music star entertaining at the Black Poodle nightclub in Printer's Alley began directing my activities. My friend and I were provided with free passes to the Black Poodle to encourage us to return each night, where entertainer and CIA operative Jack Green, Greene, and his Desperado band were playing. During breaks between sets, Green and his band would sit with my friend and me to manipulate our suggestible minds. I was told it was my destiny to have met band member Wayne Cox, C-O-X, who had been trained for paramilitary mercenary operations under Louisiana U.S. Senator J. Bennett, B-E-N-N-E-T-T Johnston, Johnston. I soon learned that everyone associated with Green was involved in his CIA Freedom Train operations. When I told Green that my friend and I would not be returning on Friday night due to attending the Grand Ole Opry, he told us that he would be working the Opry that night. He made arrangements for us to come back to stage and see him immediately following his segment. He explained that the security guard at the Opry, Nashville Metro Police, Lieutenant Bob Ezell, was a good friend of his and would let us in. At the Opry, my friend and I sat in the audience, watching as Jack Green introduced his special guest, U.S. Senator Robert C. Byrd. At the sight of Byrd, I went into a preconditioned deep trance and robotically went through the motions of following Green's instructions. Once backstage, Green pointed out his dressing room, which he was sharing with Senator Byrd, and ordered me in. The personality that had been sitting in the audience had perceived Byrd as an entertainer and could not or would not think further. But as I walked into the dressing room and saw Byrd perched on the edge of the mirror vanity in his boxer shorts, I switched into the child personality that had known him as U.S. Senator on Mackinac Island since age 13 and responded sexually. Afterward, Byrd was claiming me as his, excitedly telling me that he had always wanted his own little witch. I soon learned the enormity of the statement. Jack Green's band member Wayne Cox later told me that playing music behind Senator Byrd at the Opry was not the only way he backed him. He also backed him politically and in Freedom Train operations. Cox then made arrangements for my friend and me to stay the remainder of our trip at his trailer in Hendersonville, Tennessee. There was no choice but to comply. The following night, after Jack Green completed his show at the Black Poodle, he drove my friend and me to the nearby participating after-hours club, the Demon's Den. What a name. There, Cox was to pick us up and take us to Hendersonville. Instead, we were slipped a drug and taken on a tour of Union Station, Nashville's then abandoned train station, where supposedly the only train still running through there was the Freedom Train. Senator Byrd's attempted cultivation of superstition through my Catholic schooling should have maximized the impact of the occult ritual I was subjected to in the tower of the old stone and slate turn-of-the-century train depot. But the pain and horror was sufficiently effective in itself, even without my adhering to superstition to produce the intended mind-shattering results. Cox took my friend and me on a flashlight tour through the rubble of Union Station until he came to a homeless man sleeping on the ground. Cox ordered me to kiss the railroad bum goodbye, then shot him between the eyes while I was still only inches away. He then used a machete to chop off the man's hands, which he put in a Ziploc bag. He then led us to up the rickety stairs into the tower of the old depot. There, Jack Green, his band members, and others dressed in black robes were gathered around a black leather altar in a room lit by candles and draped in red velvet. In total shock, I was laid on the altar and subjected to rape and torture while the participants indulged in sex, blood, and cannibalism ritual. The next day, I woke up on Cox's couch, vaguely aware that I had suffered a bad nightmare. When I stood up, I passed out from blood loss. I was bleeding profusely from the vagina. It was all I could do to prepare to drive back to Michigan, and my friend was certainly not in a stable frame of mind to help. I did not know what happened to me, nor was I able to question it. I had a new obsession on my mind. I had been programmed at the ritual to move to Nashville and marry Cox, as ordered by Senator Byrd. Back in Michigan, I made the announcement to my parents that I was moving to Nashville to marry Cox, and as it was predestination. What they would not tell me was that my father had just literally sold me to Senator Byrd in exchange for lucrative military contracts that made him a millionaire overnight. A millionaire on a 6th grade education, a perverse child exploiting criminal, immune from prosecution, working as a CIA operative for the U.S. government. That mind-shattering occult ritual I endured in Nashville marked a new life of wealth and prestige for my father, while thrusting me into a new phase of torturous existence, and I had no choice in any of it. So there's a footnote down here. It says Nashville Metropolitan Police Lieutenant Bob Ezell, who also acted in capacity of Grand Ole Opry security guard, covered up the murder. Chapter 5, Tinkering with the Mind. It was 1977. I was a 19-year-old mind control program slave in the CIA DIA Project Monarch Freedom Train operation, literally owned by U.S. Senate Majority Leader Robert C. Byrd, who was then a 20-year incumbent and on the Senate Appropriations Committee. As Byrd's own little witch, which in parentheses means sex slave, I would also become involved in covert government operations. I now understand that this required more memory compartments personalities than I had developed, hence one more reason for the mind-shattering occult ritual and my predestined marriage to Cox. In typical Project Monarch structure, Byrd was my owner and in control of my life, while Cox became my primary handler and followed Byrd's orders to ensure that I was at key locations and events at appointed times and to maintain me under mind control. Cox reportedly was not paid cash for his role like my father was. Instead, he either followed orders or would be prosecuted for distributing drugs and being the occult serial killer that he was and is to date. Cox's primary role was to shatter my mind further through repeated occult trauma, as well as father my daughter Kelly to be raised in the genetic mind control studies of Project Monarch. I moved to Nashville as ordered to marry Cox, who took me to the backwoods of his hometown swamp in Chatham, Louisiana, for months at a time for occult traumatization. Cox had been brought up in witchcraft by his mother and admittedly longed for her sexually and ritually. Together, they subjected me to their beliefs, which included what equates to a weakened version of mind control used by witches for centuries, anchored in superstition rather than scientific fact. These superstitious beliefs seemingly conflicted with Cox's mercenary training to the point that his killing raged out of control. For example, Cox would murder a human through repeated stabbing with a knife, believing that the departing spirit and splattered blood gave him power to control my mind. In truth, it was my aversion and subsequent traumatization by the event that caused me to dissociate in trance, leaving my subconscious open to his suggestions and those of others. During the 3 years I was with Cox, he ritually impregnated and aborted me 6 times, consuming several of his own offspring and preserving the others, shaped in ceramic for sale in his interstate occult body parts business. Okay. Cox's MO for murdering always included removing the hands with a machete as the hands of glory he kiln dried in the ceramic shop of his and his mother's house were in demand and thus distributed throughout the occult underground supply network. Cox's protected cocaine and body parts distribution routes included Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Florida. Cox and I traveled to Florida on several occasions as his mother's parents lived in MIMS, M-I-M-S, which is only 6 minutes away from the NASA Kennedy Space Center in Titusville. Cox, like my father, made sure I was there for mind control testing and programming as ordered. Cox perceived me as a chosen one and often used the CIA Project Monarch term when referring to me and for proudly justifying his leaving me at the NASA installation. Cox had a variety of belief systems that he applied to various situations, all of which are superstition-based. He believed in spirit communication or divine guidance through nature, spirits, and demons, that Satan must be appeased, that Jesus is an alien, that the Bermuda Triangle is a door to another dimension, and that the end of the world is near. He religiously carried a Bible with him everywhere, including to occult rituals, quoting scripture like a theologian. He justified eating the body and drinking the blood, being washed in the blood, and even murdering children, according to the story of God testing Abraham by ordering him to murder his son Isaac by knife on an altar. Jim Jones was one of Cox's idols, as was Charlie Manson, and he touted the Jonestown Massacre as a prime example of the power of, and in brackets, CIA and then mind control. Cox demanded I become a Mormon in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This was to prove that Satan was everywhere, particularly in Monroe, Louisiana, Mormon church where he led occult ritual, and in the Hendersonville, Tennessee church that the so-called Freedom Train rolled through. Good God. And I'm going to go make some bread now. Don't have to go, honey. You can get you in a good show. Not skate till we meet again. Love you, mean it.